And so we're really getting into a pretty fundamental question that evangelicals haven't thought through, which is who sets the terms for political association in a given country? It's actually, and this is where I think a lot of them would flinch, it's not the church. The church doesn't set the terms of political association. The state does. So as long as the state doesn't ask you to do anything unnatural, you kind of have to go along with it.
Well, I'm Pastor George back on Grace at the Gates, and my next guest, he put it out there online, and people were excited that I was interviewing him. It's friend Miles Smith. Miles, thanks for being on, man.
Hey, George, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so this is part of a little series that I've engaged in on exploring. I'm calling it Christian nation, but it's really Christian nationalism, in particular to NAPARC discussions. So, the Reformed and Presbyterian conservative world. There's a lot of Christian nationalism study committees that are undergoing. The PCA has one. I'm in the PCA. You've written this book, Religion and Republic, Christian America from the Founding to the Civil War. Our discussion is going to be a little different than some of the others because, the others conversations were coming at it from various views of mostly Christian pastors or elders, although I did interview Stephen Wolfe, and I did get negative feedback to that, honestly, on why is he interviewing Stephen Wolfe? Because I'm trying to inform listeners on what the spectrum is here and what is inbounds and what's out of bounds. Our conversation, Miles, is going to take a little different turn because we're going to really go into the history, and that's what you are. You're a historian. Just to give listeners further kind of introduction, you and I know each other because of Meadowview.
We know each other in real life. You were my family. So
yes. Yeah, so at Meadowview, where I just left, I was senior pastor there. I was there for just about 7 years. I'd say you're a child of Meadowview.
Yeah, we went there during my high school years, and so my dad was actually a ruling elder at Meadowview for a little bit, and so I've had family go there, and so I know the church well. I know its principles were. So I think the nice thing about this is it's not, none of the things will get too spicy because you and I, we have a repertoire, and so for people listening, George and I know each other in real life. And I think that's really helpful because so much of the conversation around Christian nationalism tends to be some ad hominems, right? There's a lot of implication that, if you believe X, then you must believe Y. And so I think the nice thing is that you and I know each other well enough to probably not have the sort of sensational thing. So I think we'll be able to have a good conversation about it.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And that was occurring to me given some recent Twitter stuff going on or X, whatever. It's like, if people were face to face, it would feel maybe more collegial and less combative, maybe. But such is the world. And really what I'm doing is just giving people an opportunity to share their perspective and views. I mean, you are an expert in this. This book is, you laugh, but I think, a lot of us wanted you to be an advisor to our study committee, because they do have advisors, and I think you offer a good Protestant perspective on America as a Christian nation, and maybe we'll go there first, Miles.
Yeah.
I'm going to read some stuff from your intro and your conclusion. Man, I'm so sorry for all this buzzing. I thought they were gone. I hope it gets edited out in the editing process. But you're not ashamed. I mean, you use it, I don't know how many times. America was a Christian nation, or is a Christian nation, or was viewed as, maybe that's the best way for me to say it.
Yeah.
America was viewed as a Christian nation. It's very interesting for you to say that because it's very common nowadays to say a nation can't be Christian, that Christianity is the kingdom of God is not of this world, so a nation can't be Christian. But you say we're a Christian nation while at the same time adding a unique, dare I say, nuanced sort of take on how it was a Christian nation. So maybe let's jump in there. Any any
Yeah.
anything any way you want to enter into this conversation that way.
Yeah. So I think that for me, when I say Christian, I'm pretty quick, and I try to make this point in the book that I don't think that the United States or any other um, country, for that matter, is a churchly nation. Um, and so I draw a distinction between Christianity, which I think is not merely an ecclesiastical identity, but it's also a civilizational one. And so I'm rather comfortable with kind of saying Christianity. I am okay with cultural Christianity. I'm okay with social Christianity. I think they're good things. I think for a lot of evangelicals, they hear the word Christianity and they think of something bound by the ecclesiastical terms of the church. And I'm not I'm not there. I don't have I'm not a theocrat, and so I actually have a relatively low view, and I don't mean low as in as its worth, but I have a low view of the church as a political actor. Um, I don't think that the church. I'm. If someone were to say, "Am I a two kingdoms person?" The answer is yes. And perhaps it might surprise people that when it comes down to sort of the question of the spirituality of the church, I probably would lean more towards being a sort of the spirituality of the church person than a person who views the church as a sort of a polis or a sort of socio-political society. The probably where I would differ from the Reformed, by Reformed I mean more specifically American Calvinists downstream from Presbyterians, is that I prefer the term the independence of the church to the spirituality of the church. Um, and so I think that's an Anglican tick. There's some continental reformers who use that. Free church and a free state is sometimes what you'll hear that. So it's different than the kind of the American Presbyterian spirituality of the church, but I think it accomplishes basically the same thing. So I don't want the church ruling politics. So I have a sort of a low view of the church in that regard. But I think Christianity is something that pervades society, sort of rather sometimes even when people don't want it to or not. So I think that this will sound strange, but I think that there are some people who have no churchly identity who are Christian actors in ways they don't even kind of perceive because of the cultural and social norms they move within. And I think that describes the United States, especially for the first 100 years or so of its century, maybe even longer. My competencies tend to be in the 19th century, so I try to limit my studies to that. So I do think the United States was a Christian nation, and perhaps still is, even in other ways, if you use metrics certain ways.
So obviously you said a lot there, and I'm thinking of this as part of a larger sort of the different people I've interviewed on this. So you said you're not a theocrat. How would you
Yeah,
describe what a theocrat is?
I think a theocrat, as I understand it, is someone who wants the church as the sort of ecclesia, as the ecclesiastical body of the church, to actually do the job of the state.
Okay,
Um,
so let's pause there.
yeah,
So because you also said in connection with that you don't want the church to rule over the state. So my question is, do you see people advocating for those positions?
yeah. Actually, so I would propose my next book will kind of hint at this. I think that evangelicals perhaps are more historically theocratic than they might be comfortable with. Um, I have friends, people I respect very much, who will say something like, use a phrase like the politics of Jesus or the politics of the cross. And I actually don't love those terms, and this may sound actually almost unchristian to a lot of people. I don't think that the Bible is necessarily a guide for politics. So when Christ says, "Render unto Caesar," um, that which is Caesar's, people can't see, but sometimes they almost act like Jesus is winking when he says that. Jesus isn't winking. He's actually saying you need to give some stuff to Caesar's. Like he has the right to it. He has the ownership of it. And so I think that a lot of evangelicals have a very high view of the church and a low view of the state. And I think that one of the things about the Protestant Reformation is it actually asked people to consider having a lower view of the church. You don't want the church sort of creating terms for political association necessarily. That's the state's job. So when Jesus says, render under Caesar, which is Caesar's, that which is God, which is God's, I take him at his word. I think he wants us to basically give Caesar a lot of stuff. And the other thing to note is that Jesus isn't saying that Caesar is bad either. Um, what does St. Paul say? Honor the emperor. And so I think that we kind of need to understand that evangelicals, and I count myself as someone who's sort of an evangelical at least, right? I was reared in the PCA, and I still would define myself in some senses as an evangelical. We think that the church should sort of tell politics what's to do. That pastors actually are kind of who political agents are supposed to answer to. Now, whether we say that or not, in some ways we kind of believe it because we sort of think that politics is dirty and that the church isn't dirty. And so I think about someone like John Calvin, who said this. I'll give you a quote. This is from the Institutes. Civil magistracy is a calling not only holy and legitimate, but far the most sacred and honorable in human life. That's John Calvin, right? And so I think that in some ways we sort of have maybe misconstrued the terms of what actually church and state is.
Right. Okay. So, again, as a pastor, and you're coming out as a historian,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure people's feathers are going to be ruffled with we need to make the church lower. I think in our,
I was in a conversation. I was at dinner with some Southern Baptists recently, and I said that. I mean, it's funny because Baptists are supposed to not be theocrats, right? But the suggestion
oh, they're
that
the
the
biggest
church,
though.
yeah, the suggestion that the church might not have the right to rule is actually, yeah,
Yeah, so I think the way I get the categories I would use as a pastor, and whether it's adopting Kuyperian language or it's just using the word, is the spheres. So within their spheres or within their kingdoms. I mean, Calvin spoke of two kingdoms. I don't think he was speaking of a lot of what modern two kingdom or what's called R2K is talking about. I don't know how they would make that argument, but he did talk
right,
of two kingdoms. So within, and so you mentioned the spirituality of the church too. I think, again, as a pastor, the Bible speaks to all of life. People say, well, the Bible's not a history book, it's not a science book, it's not a politics book. Well, but it speaks to all those things. There is a Christian way to go about those things. There is a comprehensive worldview on how to view those things. And I agree with you. I mean, like what Christ is saying about Caesar, I mean, you only just have to look in the Old Testament when you to look at nations and kings and their responsibilities both under God and to their people. I think the Bible has a lot to say about it. It's not a manual for it, but principally and philosophically, there's a lot there. And I think that's why these arguments or debates are taking place, quite frankly, is people are trying to distill that into a public and political theology. And do you view yourself as doing that? Like, are you simply a historian for the past, or because I don't see a real judgment in your book.
yeah,
You're speaking what was.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean,
how do
I
you
do
view?
make,
Yeah.
yeah, I do make judgments in that I think that, um, I mean, one of the judgments I would say I make sort of inferentially, um, is that institutions are really important. And I think that too often, evangelicals have been quick to sort of try to Bible everything in sort of relying on institutions. So um, there's a
Can I
sort of
read that?
biblical,
Yeah.
yeah,
Can I read? So let me read that from the introduction, and let me kind of let, let me press you a little bit, or
yeah,
bait you a little bit, and then that way it gives you a second to think about it as it reads. But it feels like to me you're disassociating again. I mean, you certainly don't create a hard line between church and state. You understand
Mhm.
there's a give and take, a symbiosis, maybe, perhaps. But it's almost like you're disassociating the government from being churchly, and you want it,
Right,
you're pushing it down to the institutions, but then you bring it, to me, it backdoors in when you start talking about the courts and the legislatures
yeah,
doing this. So that is the government, right? So let me let me read this from
yeah,
the intro, and then we can engage that maybe. This book posits, this is from the introduction, first or second paragraph. This book posits that the early republic, United States, a period that broadly extends from 1790 to 1860, so right after the Revolutionary War and right before the Civil War, I guess, or thereabouts, Revolutionary War to Civil War, in fact remained committed to disestablishment while simultaneously protecting and even perpetuating institutional, usually but not always Protestant Christianity through federal and state courts, state colleges and institutions, state legislatures, and executive proclamations from governors and presidents, and through state cooperation with religious institutions and Protestant device. I mean, to me, that sounds very Christian nationalistic. I got to be
yeah.
honest.
Well,
So,
I think
yeah,
if you
go ahead.
I think that maybe what I present to my students like this: there's never ever been a world in which church and state were perfectly balanced. And so oftentimes in different eras, you're asked to pick your poison. Do you want to deal with a church that does too much political stuff, um, or a state that does too much religious stuff? And so this is sort of the Protestant Reformation is a confrontation with the fact that a church had become too political. And so one of the interesting things about, say, Martin Luther's letter to the German nobility um, is that he basically said he wants the church to quit confusing kings and princes. And so the United States falls on that more Protestant uh, kind of line. So what that means is the state is a more serious religious actor, and I don't mean churchly, I mean religious um, actor than say it was in the late medieval era. So what was going on in the late medieval era? Well, the church was coming in saying, no, government, you can't do this and this and this and this and this. And the Reformation is in some ways, not completely, but in some ways, a slide back to an era before the growth of papal and ecclesiastical power in the Middle Ages, where you have someone like Charlemagne basically going down and reordering the city of Rome and saying, "Hey, guys, leave the Pope alone," almost protecting the Pope, or the Constantinian settlement, which is very much the emperor saying, "Church, you guys got to figure stuff out." And so he's not making doctrine, but he is sort of giving a little. I'm using a little fist here, a little heat check to the church, to basically say, "You guys go do your job." Um, that's the settlement up until really the 11th century. And so I think we definitely, perhaps without knowing it, in the aftermath of the 20th century, have lived a world where the church has a tremendous amount of power politically. I think that would surprise a lot of Americans, but um, religion has a lot of political power, and churches have a lot of political power in the United States um, in a way that they don't really in the rest of the Western world. And so our churches are actually politically very powerful.
Well, is that because they just simply represent a constituency, or you're saying
Could
they're
be, could be. In some ways, obviously, the United States' laws are actually fairly favorable towards political expression of religion, especially if you compare them to the rest of the world now.
no, and would you would say that was, if I'm understanding your work, you would say that's deliberate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that the United States wants fairly powerful, or if not powerful, and certainly very active religious bodies, and those religious bodies obviously are political actors. I think the question becomes, when can those religious bodies bind people in the United States through through political means? Um, and so, in that sense, the United States has always been quite Protestant to say, no, the church can't tell people certain things. We, the state, can tell people things that are authoritative, and perhaps we are Christians, but no, the church itself doesn't, which is quite different, say, than the medieval settlement and the Catholic settlement up until the 19th century, wherein the church itself was a political actor setting political terms for things. And so I think this is where it gets confusing for a lot of people. And again, evangelicals we don't have a really good sense of what the church is. I mean, a lot of people think of it just as like a community or something. I mean, we even use this phrase like community church. Well, the church is already a community, so it's like saying we're a church, or like a Bible church or something like that. You hear these things.
Right,
So I think
right.
evangelicals, the taxonomy is kind of lost.
Well, yeah, and there's different context for the term. You know, I mean,
Hmm.
it's the like for me when I'm a pastor in a church and I'm saying we're the covenant community. I mean, that means we're
Yeah.
the people of God. You know, but even Scripture refers to individual churches. Paul writes letters to the churches. You know, in Revelation it says to the church at. So there's specific churches, but then Christ says, "I will build my church,"
Mhm.
singularly. Um, but anyway,
Well, I
a
think this
little
is
bit
actually,
of a
actually a good point. You bring up a good point. Like a covenant community, what's the traditional way in which you enter a covenant community? Through baptism,
through
right?
baptism, yeah, through
Yeah.
initiation
Um,
sacrament.
it- and so I think that like that line there, the baptism line, is actually an important one. I think it's why baptism means something, because you're entering in to a particular type of sacramental community that doesn't map onto a political community. So it actually doesn't, like, it's not a one for one political community to sacramental community there. There's a separation there, and that separation is not a merely spiritual separation either. I don't want to get to the point where it's like Gnostic, but it's hard to actually actualize a sacramental community on earth. I mean, some of this gets down to the difference between, say, are you an ecclesiocentric person, or are you say a Christian nationalist? Because I think this is where someone like, say, a Pete Lightheart, or a Doug Wilson would be different than someone like a Stephen Wolfe, as I understand their projects. Um, People in Moscow sort of want to orient Christian society around the church. I think Stephen Wolfe would say no. He actually has a relatively low view of the church, and that he wants to orient society towards sort of an Aristotelian Christian nation. Um, and so I actually think of those things as being quite different.
Right. So how would you view what America? I mean, do you think like when I say what America was
Yeah.
or America viewed, like when I speak in in the past tense, would you agree with that language as far as who we think we are now?
Yeah. So I think that I understand the language. I think one thing to consider is that different parts of America were in different places along that spectrum. So New England, very much life was centered around churches, because it had a history of basically the church and the state being, if not united, then very much wedded together, right? You think about the town meetings happening in each little parish church in Congregations, New England. Um, in the South, for example, where I grew up, my history is overwhelmingly Southern. In the South, the church wasn't as big of a deal. Um, I think it's important to remember at the time of the Civil War, the American North was about four times as churched per capita as the South was. So in the South, life, and there's all sorts of great books you can read on this. Life tended to be centered on the courthouse, um, right? Militias, barbecues, politics. So the South has always, really up until very recently, been less ecclesiocentric than the North. So ecclesiocentrism has its sort of expression in New England, and if you want to say more, I guess Christian nation is the alternative to ecclesiocentrism. The South reflects that more.
Okay. So as I, look down, for listeners, I look down your table of contents. Obviously, you have an introduction. You talk about Jefferson and his views, but you talk about legislation. So that's the legislature, the courts, the Sabbath in particular, which that's all fired up online right now. The world itself, Indians has its own. They have their own chapter and how they were viewed. And one thing I thought was fascinating, and it was like how the Indians, and by that you mean Native Americans, viewed missionary endeavors. So the missionaries are the church, yet as an agent of the state,
Yeah,
in my language. But you know,
yeah. No,
and
that's
then
very much. That's
and
very
then
much what.
education. Sorry, good.
Yeah, well, I think that um, I'm Anglican, and one of the Article
Yes,
37.
unfortunately,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
want you back. We want you back.
Well, I still have a lot of love and affection for my Presbyterian upbringing. They taught me the Bible, and they taught me the importance of knowing the Bible. So we'll never say anything bad about that. Article 37 says something that's really worthwhile. It lays out that it says that it is lawful for Christian men to take up arms um, at the basically demand of the magistrate. And so what it means is um, it's lawful for people who are members of a sacramental community to obey certain commands, and not just certain, like obey extensive numbers of commands from the magistrate, from the prince, whatever you want to call it. And so we kind of have forgotten this. And so I think a lot of people, if I were to say, hey, will make me the magistrate of whatever, state or country in 19th or 20th century America, is it lawful for me to ask missionaries to participate in a politically civilizing program? Um, a lot of the people in the 19th century said, yes, it is lawful for me to do that because I understand that as a Protestant, the state can ask me to do that. I don't know if that particular Protestant reflex is something evangelicals share, because I think what they would say is, well, no, that's the government, and I'm a Christian, and I only have to take political orders that the church agrees to. But actually, the church doesn't get to tell you, to a large extent, which political orders you get to follow and which ones you don't. And a good example of this is, think about controversies. I lived in Texas for a long time. My grandmother was reared in a border town. Think about the controversies over, say, a Catholic parish in El Paso, right? Um, imagine an ICE raid or something, and you don't have to say whether you like that or not, but imagine an ICE raid on a Catholic church. Um, does the Catholic Church have to obey ICE? And so we're really getting into a pretty fundamental question that evangelicals haven't thought through, which is, who sets the terms for political association in a given country? It's actually, and this is where I think a lot of them would flinch, it's not the church. The church doesn't set the terms of political association. The state does. So as long as the state doesn't ask you to do anything unnatural, you kind of have to go along with it. And so this is something that I would imagine progressive and conservative evangelicals would maybe struggle with. It means that, guess what? There were certain things that I live in Michigan. I am not close to the politics of my governor. But nonetheless, as long as she doesn't ask me to do anything unnatural, I owe her obedience. I owe her even allegiance. And that's something that's hard to swallow. The same thing, though, if someone is an American and they're on the political left, as long as Donald Trump doesn't ask them to do anything unnatural, guess what? They have to obey him. They owe him allegiance. And so what it does is it actually sort of says that this, and this is a really a Protestant commitment, right? Um, because beforehand, it was basically that the church was sort of saying, well, no, you're not doing what the church said, so you're not a king anymore, or you're not a prince anymore. And so all of this is actually cooked into Protestant political theory.
Yeah, but
Um,
don't. So is it? Do you think you're speaking? And I don't know much
yeah.
about Anglican political theology. Actually, I don't know much about any of our political
Yeah.
theology. I'm just, but like, it would seem then the American Revolution, under what you just said, would be not allowed. I mean, and yet,
Well,
in a more Presbyterian sense, there would be more. No, there are more limits to the government than simply like we have to listen to them unless they tell me to do something morally. Uh,
actually, remember, Presbyterians don't really argue for or against the American Revolution on churchly terms. They argue it on natural terms.
yeah,
And
I get that,
yeah,
but like it was known as the Presbyterian Revolution. I mean,
I
so
think,
like, and you
well,
had ministers backing it up. I mean, good, good.
ministers backing it up by saying it's that they're asking us to do something unnatural. And so most of the polemics about the American Revolution within the church are not about churchly orders. I mean, if anything, the most churchy people in the United States are against the revolution. You know, high church Anglicans, people who are devoted to the Anglican hierarchy.
Yeah, well, that's why I was. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I was saying. About what you were just how you were articulating that, I
yeah.
could see why they would be against it. But
So Presbyterians actually are funny because they actually say, no, we have to have a lower view of the church. The church can't tell us whether or not we get to have a revolution right now. The people have natural rights that are actually being trampled on. So the Presbyterian churches really were agents of a natural rights revolution. I think that there's a lot of evangelicals. I think they want to sort of position natural rights and religiosity against each other. I don't think that's true. David Van Drunen has done good work, I think, on right natural rights and natural law. I think because so many Presbyterians historically really did rest their theory of revolution on that.
which
Um,
you're validating Van Drunen's work.
yeah. I think it's worthwhile. Yeah, I mean,
Okay, so he would
natural.
say you can't have a Christian nation. That's a mixing of terms. You can't.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, I wonder these guys' audience are as overwhelmingly evangelicals. So for evangelicals, they hear the word Christian and they immediately think of as the church. And so maybe this is where I kind of tap. I live with Lutherans and Catholics, and so um, my world is not necessarily as wedded to, especially Southern evangelicals who hear Christian and they think church, right? So I think there can be Christian nation, sure. I think that Christianity is largely social, cultural, and civilizational. I don't think that there are such things as churchly nations. And by having maybe a lower view of the church, I'm able to get by with that
When
a
you
little
say
bit.
churchly, are you just saying like worship like that?
No, I think it's so there's a moral framework, right? So there's a moral framework that I have to abide by as a churchman. And I think this, and again, this is where it might get a little uncomfortable. There's another moral framework that I abide by as a magistrate potentially, and they overlap, but they're not the same circle. There's sort of a Venn diagram. There's things that are kind of overlapping, but not. So, for example, um, if you're a statesman, do you have to order the killing of people? Yeah, sometimes you have to go to war. Sometimes you have to do all those things. Does that mean that Christians shouldn't be a part of it?
No.
No. So does that mean that your churchly morality is a one-to-one sort of direct comparison between your political reality? I mean, are you as a churchman allowed to kill anybody?
No, no. I mean, self-defense, I would assume, but yeah, no, no.
Right. So like
You
there's
can't
a
order you can't order war, or I mean,
right,
because
right,
you're
right.
not
Yeah,
in
you
that,
can't,
you don't have that role. You know.
yeah. So I think that there's a tension here that a lot of evangelicals haven't thought through because we basically have said, well, Christian means church. Um, and I would hesitate to sort of bring the church over into political conversations precisely for the reason that you can't impose an ecclesiastical morality
So,
on the state.
but what you're saying, it's like it's I want to say complicated, but it's confusing.
Hmm.
For instance, there's no way, from what I've seen or heard or read of Van Drunen, and I'm not attacking the man. I
Yeah.
don't agree with his positions. That he would agree with that it would be a good thing for the church, for the United States to be committed to disestablishment while simultaneously protecting and perpetuating Christianity through federal and state courts, state colleges, institutions, state legislatures, executive proclamations, etc. Like it's just once again, it's so in your system or in
Yeah.
your analysis, which I think it seems like you agree with
Yeah,
what
I'm fairly comfortable with
with
yeah,
what
where I
happened.
land
Yeah,
on it. Yeah.
right, right. Uh, it's
Yeah, I'm good.
okay for the government, for the legislatures and the courts to give preferential treatment to the Christian religion. As a matter of fact, it's their duty.
I don't know if I would say it's in the abstract. I mean, in the United States, I think it's a prudential good for Christianity to have a loud voice because I think that's how we order our society. I don't necessarily think it would be a prudential good to wake up and try to make the King of Jordan implement Christianity in his.
So
So
no,
this is where I would defer. This is where I probably defer with more ecclesiastical readings of political theology because I don't think it's. I wouldn't impose the framework of the Christian religion uh, on non-Christian peoples. I think for me, it's completely prudential at the end of the day.
right, but would it therefore be the ideal good of any place? This is probably like
Yeah.
where, I mean, Wolf would say the same thing. He's not going to impose Christianity on Jordan, but as Christianity were to grow in Jordan, wouldn't you want, would this arrangement be the ideal arrangement for them?
Maybe. I mean, I think this is where again I'm just too Augustinian. I don't like aspirations, and so I wouldn't want the I don't want politics or church being really aspirational. I mean, again, I mean I'm I grew up a Calvinist, so I take a pretty low view of pretty much everything. Um, and I've never sort of lost that. And so for me, I think that in the United States, Christianity is an essential social and civilizational ordering principle. I think it's bad to take it out of American life. I wouldn't say it's a prudential good, or it would be virtuous to basically to destabilize the society in order to implement Christianity. So again, I think for me, it's almost completely prudential. But where I would defer maybe with Van Drunen is, I don't think the church is this kind of so pure thing that it sort of needs to never sort of be touching other human institutions. So for me, I'm like, you know what? If the government needs pastors to help out with stuff, okay, that might be the case. They need to help out.
This is fascinating because it feels like it's almost a pragmatic argument that this is our culture, this is our, and
Yeah.
again, this is where you would, so in some sense you're like, you can align with parts of other guys, and in another sense
Yeah.
you are aligning with Wolf and some of the Christian nationalists, even though you're not aligning with them. But
Yeah.
your view is essentially saying culturally this is how our society works, and it's good to perpetuate
Yeah.
that.
I think for me, it's about custom, right? Like, I mean,
When they would say
custom,
tradition or
yeah,
whatever, but
customs or traditions or whatever are valuable. You don't want to pull out. Those are kind of the Jenga blocks that help you build the tower of a society, and you don't want to pull those out. Um, and so, yeah, it's paradoxical. And I think again, I mean, having sort of existed outside of some of the evangelical conversations now, I'm able to get by with this without people sort of saying, "Oh, well, that I don't understand that. That sounds paradoxical." I think that a lot of politicians basically live in the world I do, and they kind of understand Christianity is culturally necessary. It's good. I wouldn't
Yep.
want to impose it somewhere.
Well, in the book, you talk about the second disestablishment,
Right.
where so politicians are not agreeing with this. In the last, I don't know what the time frame, 100 years or whatever, where they're not maintaining a Christian identity in institutions. They're trying to strip it out of the institutions.
Yeah, and I think the 1960s is um, actually a relatively coercive attempt to do things that were sort of over and against what people wanted.
Is that
So
good or
I don't.
bad?
I think it was bad. I think that courts shouldn't impose metaphysical frameworks. Um, I think that I think that the ideally in our system the people should. Um, and so this is one of the things. I mean, like if the people if the people go crazy, that can be bad. So you want to keep the people from going crazy, and I think Christianity is a good thing that keeps people from going crazy. St. Augustine says, well, I'll just read you the quote. I've got it somewhere in my. Hold on just a minute.
Yep.
I'll get this. It's always good to go back to Augustine. Um, or Augustine. I don't know how. I grew up saying Augustine. I think bougie people say Augustine. Um, I don't know. George, you're from Florida. How do you say it? How do
Well,
you say that?
Floridians, I think, say Saint Augustine, but
Okay, okay.
I think it should be Augustine. And if you're you're friendly with the Catholics, they're Augustinian monks.
That's right.
So
Um, all right. Here you go. It's in the city of God, and it's one of my favorite passages. He says this: even the heavenly city, therefore, while in its state of pilgrimage, avails itself of the peace of earth, and so far as it can, without injuring faith in godliness, desires and maintains a common agreement among men regarding the acquisition of the necessities of life, and makes this earthly peace bear upon the peace of heaven. And so,
hmm.
why do you want? Why would you want a place for a flourishing religious politics? Well, that points to heavenly things. Okay, well, why wouldn't you want to impose Christianity? Because that would destabilize a place. It would not lead to people necessarily thinking about the things of God. And so it would actually not lead to people thinking about the things of God and therefore thinking about the things of heaven. And so Christianity is valuable because it helps order our society in some ways that we can kind of do things that are just the stable normative things that people are supposed to do. Like think about things above us, think about things of God. Um, the heavenly city avails itself of the peace of earth. Think about that and the significance of that. It means that why is it good to have, like, I don't know, religion in a society? Well, I don't know if religion does anything good or not, but if you have religion and if you have some unity around a religion, it means you're probably having other forms of stability. And that if you have stable families and stable places, it doesn't bring about utopia, but it does allow people to think about the things of God. And so there's a syllogism there that Augustine creates that I think is worth thinking about. A lot of people think that um, Christian politics is about getting people saved. I don't think that because I don't think politics saves people. I think the church saves people. I mean, fundamentally, I think Jesus saves people, right? Um, but you do want politics to create the type of order where people will think about true things. And since Jesus is himself truth, they will think about true things because their society is oriented towards thinking about true things.
Okay, well, I mean that's a good segue if you want to go there to James Baird's book,
Yeah.
which is trying to say, it's the government's duty to promote the public good. Christianity is part of the public good, ergo, you I mean, it sounds like you just made that formulation in a little bit different way. So
Yeah.
what would you say about that?
Well, I think that James's book is on to something. I mean, he's trying. I think he's understanding how. like what the historical sort of reform types thought they were doing. And I think that's good. I think maybe one thing to consider is that there's a lot of people who are even Protestants in the United States who wouldn't necessarily go along with the particular reformed articulation of it. One thing that's there's a thinker named Calvin Colton in the early Republic, and he wrote against people who were trying to enforce the Sabbath, and he called them Protestant Jesuits. And he called them that because he basically said, look, there's these people who don't understand that their version of this thing isn't very popular. But they're around a bunch of people who think that their version of this thing is popular because they're kind of in a space where they don't see other people. And he was writing that in a time of relatively substantive social change. And so I think that for Reformed people, looking at the best of ressourcement, it's good to understand the the breadth of the tradition. I think the caution would be to understand that if you are in a place, especially in the Sun Belt, you're in a place where you're much more likely to find people who agree with you. That's a good thing, but it means you should probably understand there's large parts of the country where people don't agree with you. And so instrumentalizing aspects of the Reformed tradition to inform the rest of society will probably not be a stabilizing force. It probably won't even point people towards the things of heaven. So where I live, it's the single biggest church in my town is a Roman Catholic parish. There was a map, I think Ryan Burge did it, on kind of evangelical identity in a given county, and I live in one of those under 10% counties. Very few evangelicals. And so if I were to come basically mandate certain aspects of the Calvinist Sabbath in my community, one, no one would follow it, and two, they would probably actually turn against the state and create a destabilizing situation. And revolutions are bad.
So the you have a whole chapter on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So blue laws, and I mean, by the way, why are they called blue laws?
That's a great question.
Okay,
I should know that. I grew up in
I know. It's okay.
Davidson, Davidson County was blue until I was a kid. So,
everywhere was. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
but so good thing or not a good thing? But when they were instituted,
Blue laws actually weren't necessarily meant to do what people think they were meant to do. And so, I mean, my wife and I, we eat at home typically on Sundays. And so, like, our life probably wouldn't change that much. Sometimes we'll go out for breakfast, but like our life probably wouldn't change that much. But nonetheless, I think the idea that Americans were comfortable with sort of Sabbatarian provisions is overstated. Americans have historically not been particularly church going. Even back when there was more quote unquote churches, American church going is a 20th century thing. So the Cold War is actually when the most people were in churches, the 50s and 60s. About the same time, all the old religious stuff is being sort of deconstructed.
More percentage than the 1700s?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is part of the thing that's hard for people to understand, is that there weren't a lot of people in churches in the right up until the middle of the 19th century. I mean,
but were they was it, dare I say, the common folk weren't in churches, but it was the more of the professionals were? I mean,
yeah,
I thought it was supposed to be like a social good, and so people were doing it just because they should. And
it was definitely
think of Jonathan Edwards in Northampton, Mass, and others.
Yeah, but everybody thinks about New England.
Yeah.
And so historians are actually good on this, because most American evangelicals kind of think New England, they like New England for some reason, just ridiculous to me, but like, I don't like New England. I became an Anglican to get further away from New England. And so New England's not the norm. It's the norm for American Calvinists who are really aspirational, who kind of want, a sort of reclaim New England, but New England wasn't the norm, um, especially in the South. Most people just aren't as aggressively church going, um, and so I think that that's something to consider. Uh, a lot of this comes from
So they had
so
Christian cultural identity and they weren't going to church.
absolutely you were much more likely to have what you might call Christian culture or Christian society rather than churchly culture or churchly society.
Yeah. So
Um,
I know your time is short at this point. Let
no,
me
no,
read.
we
Oh, we can. Okay. Well, let me anyway. I'll read from your conclusion. Actually, Abounding Grace Radio shared this on one of my YouTube channels. I assume that's Chris Gordon. We were talking about you. He says he puts this from your conclusion. I laid out my main historical contention that the early U.S. was a republic of Christians committed to what I have termed Christian institutionalism. That is, they wanted to maintain Christian precepts in their nation's various social and political institutions without sacralizing those principles or subordinating the American Republic to a church. Um, and you talk about like you did America from the founding of the American Republic to the Civil War, which we talked about. The commitment to Christian institutions transcended questions of church, of state churches and establishment or disestablishment. As long as Christians remained committed to upholding Christian institutions in the civil, political, and social structures of the American Republic, the U.S. would be a Christian nation. Again, why this is complicated or confusing to me is because when you talk about the civil, political, and social structures, you're talking about the legislature, the courts, the government-run entities.
yeah.
So it sounds to me like if the legislature is making laws upholding these things, as the legislatures are doing, they are, in a sense, legislating based on Christianity, which is what the Christian nationalist movement wants.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately, people who define themselves as Christian nationalists want like Christianity, but I think part of it is it's admittedly a narrow reading of Christianity, right? It typically is their Christianity. I think part of the Christian nationalist conversation is it's very sectarian. Um, and
Are you willing to say who? Like when I read Wolf, or even
well,
I
I mean,
saw
just
James Baird
any
say
concern. I mean, even
pan
some people
Protestant.
who I might respect. The problem is with Christian nationalism is that we've had Christian nationalism for a long time, and it's what we call progressivism now. The fundamental problem with Christian nationalism is that it doesn't admit, I think, that we had Christian nationalism,
What
and
years
it's
are we talking? 1900s?
the 20th century was
Yeah.
Christian nationalist. I mean, America was very, very Christian and very, very progressive. Um,
Doesn't that say what Christian nationalists would say, and this is where I would agree with them, that every nation or entity is going to, I mean, there is a God and a religion. And so, like, for you to call the 9th to 20th century Christian nationalism, of course, that was dominated by social justice, social mainline Protestantism,
yeah,
I assume, which, guys like me would say aren't Christian.
right.
You know,
But, I mean, you can say that because you
yeah,
live in 2025. But here's the thing. Um, we kind of think, especially if you're an evangelical, you tend to think that your tribe is bigger. So Gresham Machen, basically, his world was tiny. The stuff that came out of it was tiny. Really, up until the 1950s, evangelicalism is a non-entity, and it's still a non-entity in a lot of ways. I mean, that doesn't mean it's bad. I'm just saying that like it wasn't influential. So what we've said is okay. In order to create the history that leads to our right-wing interpretation, we basically have to say that these progressive Christians weren't Christians. And I think there's a great example in a person like Woodrow Wilson. You'll hear him called a liberal Protestant a lot.
right.
He was pretty much a normal evangelical. He could have signed on most of the stuff that we call evangelicalism, but he was still a progressive. And so I think that the thing for Christian nationalists is like if they could sort of show a seamless world in which there had always been the kind of this right wing thing, maybe they would have a better leg to stand on. But I think that there's always been Christian nationalism, and the reason I distrust it is because it's been left wing as much as it has been right wing. Um, and so I don't.
But
I
to
think
that point, so to that point, like most of these Christian nationalists now, I hear Doug Wilson say he's not looking to go to the like he wants Christendom 2.0 or something. So he's not like he wants to take the good and throw out the bad. Obviously, things like well, I hope he would say things like slavery and some of the other persecutions that took place. But like these guys typically want to go back to the 1800s. They cite the Presbyterian theologians of that day. Those are the some of that's the glory days, of course.
yeah,
Minus you got to say minus the slavery and other stuff. But you're saying like you wrote a whole book now on that period,
yeah.
saying these people viewed themselves as a Christian nation, upholding Christian institutions, but not calling that modern.
I don't think they lead to right wing evangelicalism necessarily. I think that's the hard thing. Because I think that what right wing evangelicals want to do, and I understand we all kind of want to tell a story that gets everybody to where we are. They want to say, okay, this sort of thing isn't who we are. I mean, people do this with all movements. You never want to take kind of like the not cool stuff about your historical antecedents. But the fact of the matter is, like evangelicalism, and especially even the quote unquote right wing version, um, led to what you might call progressivism in the early 20th century. And my colleague Richard Gamble has very good books on this. Um, and so I commend his work to you. War for Righteousness, talking about how the development of what we might call Christian nationalism leads to liberal internationalist secular Protestantism in the beginning of the 20th century. And so I think that this is the problem with Christian nationalism. Not that we might not find moments where it's kind of good, but we can't find a seamless sort of history where it sort of always is good. It's been bad as much as it's been good. And so I think to your question, like, what are the parts of the Christian nation I would keep? I would keep the parts that are, I'll call relatively low stakes, like aspects of religious freedom. Because I think if you up the ante too much, you pile so much on there, it's actually hard to sort of keep it. What is you think about, Benjamin Franklin, a republic if you can keep it. Um, I don't know how well we kept it, and I wouldn't want to sort of baptize a Christian nation either in that sense. So I tend to have a pretty low trustworthiness of the idea that there's a durable Christian nationalism that can be either implemented or sort of refounded. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't, I think, look at the tradition there. It doesn't mean, I mean, there's aspects of the Enlightenment that I think are worthwhile, aspects of, say, secularism that I think are worthwhile. Same way there's aspects of maybe something like Christian nationalism I might think are worthwhile. I just don't think that there's a tradition that we can render up to our own time of stable, conservative, quote unquote, Christian nationalism.
Is pluralism and has pluralism been good for the United States?
I don't think the United States is pluralistic or it has ever been.
We're not pluralistic.
No.
What's the dominant worldview and philosophy today?
I think the dominant worldview is I guess if you were to put me on the spot, like something like neoliberalism, right? Like basically late 20th century neoliberal capitalism. And so I don't think of the United States as being particularly pluralistic.
Why is that?
Because I think basically most people believe the kind of what the social catechesis tells them to believe. Yeah, so this is where I'm a bit of a weirdo. I just don't think of, like, a lot of people say, oh, we're pluralistic. And usually they'll be like, they'll be like, how do you know you're pluralistic? Well, I have a different immigrant group living down the street from me, and we have an Asian restaurant here, an Italian restaurant here. I don't think that makes your society pluralistic at all. I think that the United States is a small L liberal country, and that liberalism is still the dominant catechesis.
I have no idea what box to put you in.
That's good.
I'll leave that for my list. I'll leave that for
Yeah.
anybody that's listening to this,
Uh,
because once again,
I typically vote for conservative politicians, so if that makes
well, I'm
people
not
feel
saying politically. I'm saying in your political theology, I'm not clear what you're advocating for. What I get from your book, which is clear, I mean,
yeah,
it's clear as day, is that in the 1800s, the citizenry of America viewed themselves as Christians living in a Christian nation and with a duty to uphold Christianity in all the different, you call them institutions, or I'll say spheres. And, I think that's a contribution to this conversation. It's
yeah.
important recovery of, because for years we were starting to be told we were never a Christian nation. We're just a bunch of deists and who
Well, yeah,
started
I
this.
think
And
that if people want to know what I think, like what might separate me from the average, you know, lefty on a college camp, I don't think the United States is an expression of the Enlightenment. I don't really buy that the Enlightenment was ever kind of the driving force behind the formation of the American Republic. Um, so whether, and that doesn't mean I don't think the United States has been liberal, small L liberal. I'm perfectly happy to say it's been liberal. I think that there's good forms of Christian liberalism. I would define myself as sort of a conservative, small L liberal. Um, but I don't think that the Enlightenment has much of a role in the formation of the American Republic. Um, and so
when
I
when
would,
when you when you say Christian liberal, small L liberal, uh, you're open. What does that mean? You're just open to various viewpoints. What
no,
do you
no,
communicate? I mean, you're not like again. And maybe there's listeners here who think that means you're
yeah,
like, well, I deny the inerrancy of Scripture, which I don't.
no, because
I know.
you're again, you're using church terms
I know.
and
No, I know
and
that. That's why
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
trying
No,
to help you
I
out.
think I am far more. I mean, here's what's funny. I have friends in the PCA who tell me there's no theological liberals in the PCA. I was like, of course there are. Of course there's theological liberals in the PCA, because no church is a seamless garment. Um, what they mean is there's no people who deny a certain expression of liberalism from a very narrow window of the 1920s and 30s in the PCA.
Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what they mean. No, I am far more theologically conservative than most conservative
Right.
Presbyterians.
I'm just asking you to define it for the
Yeah,
listeners because I'm
like
trying to help you out.
liberal means for me uh, devoted to certain ideas downstream from English Whig thought in the 17th and 18th century. So I don't want the government to have too much of a say in the economic and social ordering of a given country. Even if it has a right to it, I would rather the government not sort of claim all those rights. And so some people say that sounds libertarian. I don't think of myself as a libertarian because I think that there's a Christian influence that's necessary for that government to be able to say, okay, we're not going to be involved in that stuff while also keeping good order. Um, and so perhaps this makes me something more like a European Christian Democrat, small d Democrat. Uh, but I don't think of myself as being a person who particularly trusts the state that much. Um, and so I have fairly low stakes on most institutions, even as I think they matter.
So, in your political theology or political philosophy, is the government, is it okay, even right? Maybe they even have a duty to uphold, like in their laws, have things that preference Christianity and Christian morality.
I think it means when we say preference, like I think that that's in the United States, preferring Christianity is just the natural consequence of ordering the society you have well.
It's okay to do that.
I mean, it depends on what we mean by preference, but like for example, I mean, if when I go to a when I to go to a football game, um, like whether okay, let's say people don't. I don't know why we have invocations at football games, but we do. So, right. Um, I think it would be. I don't know if I need the government to do this, but I certainly am okay with society making certain determinations about things. So the question is, do I want to offload duties that I think are the society's onto the state? Um, Probably not. I'd rather society work things out. But that means, by the way, that I'm okay with society being maybe a little bit more rambunctious than a lot of evangelicals are. Leo Strauss, famous political philosopher, said that natural rights are dynamite to civil society. So I think people have a right to sort of organize themselves in a way that might be a little bumpy for some people. Um,
Could the government allow um, Christian monuments, whatever that might mean? I mean,
yeah,
as a Presbyterian out. Okay, what can they in the same government disallow Hindu ones?
it would depend on what principle. I don't see how the United States government, as the
Well,
constitutional
no,
government.
so the state government, the city government, whatever,
Yeah, I
whatever,
mean,
whatever magistrate
let me
level
put it
would.
this way, and this is something that Americans haven't sort of dealt with. I live in Michigan, Dearborn, Muslim majority town. There's no reason why Dearborn can't pretty much do what they want. I can't find a good legal reason for them. The same thing, though, is that let's say I have some overwhelmingly Presbyterian town in, I don't know, like York, South Carolina, or somewhere, big ARP area. Like, if a town is 70% ARP and they want to close everything down and make a bunch of blue laws, like, I don't know why they can't.
Well, this is
So
getting to a difference. This is getting, so I would think like a Brad Isbell, who I had on, who's uh I don't know if he identifies as R2K or not, but essentially is adopts that position. I don't think he'd want any of that. And it sounds to me like he represents a group in PCA for sure. Like, because he doesn't want to give the right, he doesn't want to claim the right for Christians, because that would mean ceding the right to other groups, like you just said, in Dearborn,
yeah,
Michigan, perhaps. So
I
it
just, I
should
just,
it should just be left out. But you're essentially saying, yeah, the government does have the right to order
state,
themselves, however.
yeah, state government.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just natural. Look, if a bunch of people in Michigan in a given municipality are Muslims, like, why can I, like, it's almost like what people want is they want an enforced secularism, right? So
Well,
if
that's
my
right.
choice,
They
yeah, so
some
if
do.
yes, if my choices are enforced secularism, enforced Christianity, or given municipalities can, through whatever legal means, do have public expressions of Christianity or Islam, I'm going to take that middle position. So I think
But
that
then, how far would you take that? Because, like, so take like England, right, where
yeah,
Islam is obviously growing and growing increasingly dominant and hostile there, and
yeah,
just reading Bible verses around Muslims is now not being allowed because, as I understand the reasoning, is, well, you're disrupting the peace in doing that. In other words, you're antagonizing a people by
yeah,
doing that, and so by giving into um,
yeah. I
honestly a
think that
culture, philosophy, and religion that is not native to
Britain's
Western
government,
civilization. Good.
Britain's government is not wedded to the idea of natural rights at all. It's wedded to a specific idea of parliamentary sovereignty. So
So
the
okay, so
people,
God, I'm sorry,
yeah,
I keep interrupting you, Miles. I'm really
no, no,
sorry.
no, you're
God.
fine. So my guess is if Britain had the type of system we do, they would not be dealing with this stuff. But what their parliament does is any time that there's, uh, any sort of thing where someone says they're uncomfortable, parliament over and against the people. Remember, we have federalism. Federalism's awesome, by the way. People should be more excited about it. Um, right? What they do is they basically let these 650 people in the Commons determine everything for every community. And thank the Lord that there are things that Congress can't touch here. So I wouldn't want necessarily a population in California governing my hometown in North Carolina, right? Like you don't. I mean, we wouldn't want Lexington and Salisbury being governed by the mass of people in California, but because there's no federalism in Britain, the mass of people in the cities governs everywhere. They don't have federalism, right? They don't have states. And so that delineation actually allows us to get at religious freedom while also preserving important aspects of the Protestant order. And so, like, there's a reason why it's good for places to be able to politically express aspects of their Christianity, but we can do that without having to resort to a nationalistic framework wherein it would become destabilized, probably unwieldy, and we wouldn't have anything because everybody would be fighting all the time.
So the in Dearborn, Michigan, the 5 calls to prayer, that's not destabilizing. It's not destabilizing.
Not really in Dearborn. Not really in
No, but
Dearborn.
but that's the kind of thing that's going to spread to other places. I mean, that's
But
and
we
what
don't
if
know that.
Christians? Well,
So now we're not. Now we're. This is the thing. I think so many people are doing prognostication instead of like what's going on the ground. I'll give
so
you an
you're
example.
fine. You're fine with it because the people that live there are fine with it.
I mean, I'm fine with it because the parts of me that wouldn't be fine with it wouldn't actually help order society in such a way that I would actually be able to point them towards something better.
But I mean, there's clearly. I don't know if it was you mentioned Texas before. I know it was if it was in Texas with the Hindu sort of celebrations going on that were disrupting all kinds of public, just people living in their neighborhoods. I mean, like, isn't there an understanding that, again, because of, this is where I start to like lean toward those guys, like the
Yeah,
Christian nationalists, because it's like, yeah, like there's this infringement that is going beyond simple private exercise of your religion. It's being imposed publicly. And so to me, the option is you go the Brad Isbell way, just to use him because this has been an ongoing conversation, which says nobody can do it. Or there's the Stephen Wolfe way, which says, no, there's a group that can do it. It's the Christians because that's the heritage here. Uh,
yeah.
but
And I think I say let everybody do it, um, because I think that uh, everyone is always saying, "Well, look, the society's going to be stabilized." I mean, the most prosperous areas of the country, the ones that have sort of rapidly increasing HDIs, human development indexes, um, are places that are relatively diverse. Um, and so that doesn't mean diversity is good for its own sake. It just means that there's forms of diversity that scare us that we don't have to like. We don't even have to think they're good. But I can't use the state. I have no right to use the state to sort of manhandle aspects of things that I think are good. And by state, I mean the federal government. Yeah, if Texas wants to pass a law, they have the right to do that. If the city of whatever wants to pass a law, they have the right to do that. I think this is where, again, it's the question of federalism. Um, I think, yeah,
yeah, I mean, that part is good and it's interesting given some of these debates where, and this is something Stephen Wolfe
yeah,
will say is like, well, they can send men to war, put the death penalty in place, but they can't regulate commerce on the Sabbath. I
yeah,
mean, it's completely inconsistent to say the government has a right to legislate in ways that they want to, as long as it's not for Christianity. like,
yeah. I mean, so I think Steven's from California, and so like I think one of the things
but
going
he
on,
lives in
yeah, he
your
lives
old
in
home
North
state now.
Carolina,
Yes.
precisely because like I think we kind of did it with. I mean, North Carolina was pretty lefty even when I was growing up. Like it wasn't really a Republican state until when I was like 10 or 11.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
uh, and so I think that what a lot of people have seen is particular areas of the United States become very destabilized in really bad ways over the last 20 years. Um, and California is one of those places, right? So I get it. But I don't want to import California's problems into North Carolina, which I think is a pretty healthy place still. Um, and so I think socially North Carolina is pretty good. Like I think it's fairly Christian on the ground. I don't think that immigration is destabilizing North Carolina um, to the degree that perhaps things are in California. I don't. That doesn't mean, by the way, that I'm open borders guy. Actually, I would be fine tightening up immigration, no problem. And so, if the argument goes something like this, I think that we, as a given country, have been too loose, and we need to use the electoral control to get control of Congress and to pass laws. They have a right to do that. Um, I don't think that means overpowering sort of the legal framework we have and sort of doing it via a sort of low grade constitutional reformation.
It sounds like to me the common theme in what you're saying or advocating for is the government has a basic right to do whatever it wants, not without limits, whatever it wants that it views is in the best interest of its citizenry. And if that means further promoting and benefiting Christianity, good, but it might not mean that, and that's good too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it just have to be open-handed. I think politics is the art of the practical. The church isn't meant to be practical, but politics is. And so whatever you can do practically within, the framework of a well-ordered society, that's fine.
What duty does it have under God? Because I mean, that's the argument that whether it's establishmentarians or covenanters are going to
Yeah.
make is like nations and citizens have a duty under God to order society in ways that acknowledge him and his truth. So
I mean,
what
whose
duty
truth?
does
Whose truth? I mean, Covenanters are Scottish. I'm an American. I don't have to give a poo about what they think.
well, biblical truth?
I mean, whose biblical truth?
Well, that's why like a James Baird will say like a pan Protestant. So like a general.
Lutherans don't want anything to do with the Calvinist Sabbath. So who's Protestants? Again, it comes back to a pretty specific right-wing Southern Baptist, and oftentimes converts from Baptist churches into the PCA. It's sort of just the moral majority, but we're a little bit more highbrow now. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's probably not going to be as effective as people think. And so typically when someone says reformed, what they mean is Sun Belt. So Sun Belt, from California to maybe North Carolina or whatever. Relatively conservative, sort of reformed-ish, right? Oftentimes people coming from Baptist churches into Presbyterian churches who kind of want to do a sociological syncretism. So they kind of want to be the old moral majority Baptist while they're Presbyterians. And so it's still pretty narrow. I mean, like I live in a state of 10 million people, and it's just not going to work. Not going to work in Illinois. Not going to work in Texas.
Yeah,
and
but
so I think,
but there. I mean, we could. So Lutherans and Presbyterians are still Christians, like so they disagree over Sabbath. They disagree over a number of things, but there's still
right.
a union in Christ that is more than simple a spiritual union. There's a body
Right.
of the Apostles' Creed and then some. So, I think most of these guys are saying that.
Yeah, but I mean, again, those are churchly things, not political ones. So there's no.
Yeah,
What is
so
the politics?
what is it to order an institution to make it a Christian institution? Then, again, your book's thesis.
Yeah, I mean, my book's thesis really is that you're facing particular Christian socio-moral precepts. So something like, even you might say, the Golden Rule. And the Protestant aspects of it is really that the church doesn't get to jump in and tell you what a hospital is supposed to do, for example.
Yeah.
And so it's Presbyterians giving that. So my cousins were born in Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte. It's Presbyterians giving of themselves to an institution that's not a churchly institution. And so I think that the church is offering its own people into the other sphere. And you want the church to sort of do that seasoning, right, in the other sphere. I like it if, growing up, you'd know, hey, so-and-so went to whatever church. Oh, hello, good to see you, if they're a nurse or something. So I think that's good. But I'm not sure I want the state to mandate that.
Yeah,
Um,
but again, your book talks about through legislation and the courts. So in what
yeah,
sense?
state legislatures.
Yeah, okay, I get that. So okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, like, look, if the state of Florida goes hard right and the state of Alabama goes hard left, I'm just making that up because, right, the idea of Alabama going hard left is funny, right? I'm not sure that I can sit here and wring my hands about it. Um, I would wring my hands if there was some sort of federally sort of nationalized Christianity imposed.
What
Um,
so what is, again, going back to the duty? What is the duty of the state? And again, whether whatever magistrate level you want it, what is their duty to uphold the good and punish the evil?
well, I mean, like, Quakers believe that, like William Penn believes that. Um, I think that,
Yeah, but what's the basis for the good and the evil? Because we live in a society right now where it's called evil if parents stop their kids from wanting sex change operations. I
right,
mean,
but
like what?
you don't have to be a Christian to agree with that. Muslims agree with that too. So I think that ultimately, what we call good and evil, we end up sort of litigating on churchly terms instead of natural terms. And so instead of sort of viewing it as sort of Puritan style, the Bible says this is sin, this, we ought to think in more natural terms. And there's an overlap there because the church has certain natural commitments too. I think of someone like my friend James Wood, who I think has talked about this and the need for the church to sort of speak more clearly on the natural sort of aspects of Christianity.
So
Um,
so so nature and natural theology, it should guide
I
governments.
think so. Yeah, I think that that's the most comprehensive way that it can be done in the American order,
If
for sure.
Christians, if like you said in your example, whether, and maybe it's a city or maybe it's a state, they decide they are going to enforce the first table law. Can they do that? Not
That's,
the federal
I mean,
government, but the group living there.
yeah, I mean, there's nothing within the American constitutional order that would keep that from happening. Whether it's prudential or not,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't know if it would be prudential or not, but I can't see anything. Um, I mean, the probably the biggest question is whether Everson actually keeps a state from having a church. Um, Court case, 1947. Um, Probably, but I'm not even sure. And here's the thing. I mean, it. I am enough of a Two Kingdoms guy not to like the idea of state churches, precisely because I am a Two Kingdoms guy. I like the church being independent. I think it would be great for the Church of England if they kicked the bishops out of the House of Lords a long time ago. Um, so I don't like uniting because I think of it as essentially state churches can tend towards theocracy. Not that they are theocratic by their nature, but they can tend that way.
So you actually don't have a theology of this. Is that safe to say?
I
I'm not saying that as a pejorative. Like, but I mean, again,
Yeah,
you're a historian. Like, you
yeah.
don't have a political actual
I
theology.
would avoid ecclesiastical pronouncements on it.
Yeah.
Um, because
Okay.
I'm not sure that a pastor has. I don't understand when Jesus said, "Give render unto Caesar." I think that meant Caesar. Um, and so yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been fascinating and interesting. And dude, I appreciate you
No,
coming.
hey
Was
man,
there anything
always
else you want?
we'll
Yeah.
get you back
Was
home and eat some barbecue again and hash it out further. So
and some cheer wine.
yeah.
That's stuff so sweet. It needs to be diluted with seltzer. They'll
I
never
only
let me.
drink it. I only drink it if I'm in Salisbury or Lexington. If I go to a barbecue place or something. I'll get it for colleagues up here because they like it. So I'll bring a big bunch of it. But
Uh,
yeah, great conversation. We'll do it again.
yeah. Thanks for your time, Miles.
All right. Thanks, George.
Yeah. Great.
Take
Take
care,
care.
buddy.
Bye bye.
The training of the next generation of pastoral leaders is of vital importance. The problem is that seminary is oftentimes incredibly expensive. You have to uproot your family, you have to go to another place where you're not plugged into a local church. What BTS does is it provides a way for people to continue in their hometown, continue in their present ministry, gain the tools that they need for pastoral leadership, be equipped for the work of the ministry for the long haul, and do it inexpensively but substantively. I love that about Birmingham Theological Seminary.